A couple of months ago, I was on a Tinder date. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh God, James uses Tinder? And to that, I say, shut up. Tinder is a valid social interaction site, and I have had plenty of valid social interactions on it. Okay? I just want to find someone I can talk to about musicals with for 5 hours. That's not really a difficult request. So me and this girl, who shall remain nameless because I actually don't remember her name and I don't feel like looking it up, talked about musicals for 5 hours. It was nice. We texted back and forth for a little bit after that, but eventually she stopped texting me back, and I was like, oh well, guess she's not interested. Back to writing my Shrek 2 review. God, feels like a million years ago I wrote about Shrek 2. Did I mention how stunning the cinematography is? This shit puts live action movies to shame. Oh wait, we were talking about Tinder Girl. Okay, so the point of my story is, she did leave one important impact on me even after all this time. She got me to watch her favorite musical, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Not the Disney movie, I've seen that. The musical based on the Disney movie. The one that never really made it to Broadway or community theater circulation in my area, and thus I never saw it. So I watched the bootleg and it's really good. Quasimodo has a deformed sounding voice that comes across as haunting, kinda like evil Lupita in Us but less dumb. Phoebus is a dude bro?
Back from the front and admiring both the backs and the fronts.
Odd choice, but he has more character here than he did in the movie, and you still buy his transition into a hero who opposes Frollo's actions. Esmeralda is mostly the same, but given more songs to develop her character and her plight. The gargoyles are way cut down, and A Guy Like You is cut entirely, which is music to my ears. Plus their one good line from the movie is capitalized on during a pivotal song.
We're only made of stone. We just thought that you were made of something stronger.
Oh man, that's deep.
Overall, it's a great adaptation with more thought and care put into it than most other Disney stage adaptations. Oh wait, did I miss a character? Oh yeah, the greatest Disney villain to ever exist. Judge Claude Frollo, the dude who's so evil he captures a family, murders a woman in cold blood on the steps of a church, and attempts to drown her baby in a well. And this is just the first 5 minutes of the movie. How did an even darker, more adult take on the Disney version of this story handle the most evil monster to ever come out of this studio? Well, he seems like a nice guy at first.
Did not see that coming.
Yeah, Claude Frollo, religious fanatic and abusive father who sniffs a woman's hair and tries to force sex out of her by threatening her with death. He seems okay at first. And that is the scariest aspect of this character. Let me break down Froyo in the musical for you. In general, the musical seems to follow the original novel a lot closer than the movie did. By how much exactly? That I don't know, since I never read the book. Because much like my longtime $10 Patreon supporter, I am an uncultured swine. Seriously though, support me on Patreon, I need to feed my 5 kids. Frollo immediately makes a positive impression in the musical by T-posing. So 2.5 minutes in, you see that T-pose and you're like, okay, maybe this guy is alright. He's wearing white, he's the archdeacon in this version and not some corrupt judge. I mean, the archdeacon was so nice in the movie, so Frou-Frou is gonna follow suit in this version, right? Religious people are always really nice and holy and spiritual, right? None of them are sadistic monsters, right?
Is this correct?
I mean, it should be.
Getting back to the opening though, the musical deviates from the film by telling Frollo's backstory rather than just starting out with him being a bloodthirsty monster. In the musical, Frollo has an unruly brother, Jehan, who's much more wild and free compared to the stoic, devout, good Christian boy Frollo. Jehan brings a gypsy lady home one day for Claude, and he's like,
No, thank you, please.
So Claude rats his bro out, who is then expelled for being a bad boy. Several years pass, and Claude gets a letter from Bowser. I mean, his brother. Anyway, his brother is now dying, and his girlfriend died, but they have a baby. I think you know where this is going. So yeah, in this version, Quasimodo isn't just an adoptive son, he's actually Frollo's biological nephew. Yes, we've done that before, but this presents a new sense of ambiguity to their relationship in this version. How much does Frollo truly care for Quasimodo? In the original, not at all. I think that became obvious when he tried to drown the baby in a well, but he doesn't do that in this version, obviously. Quasimodo has explicit meaning to him as the last remnant of his brother, as well as his brother's last request. He doesn't care for Quasimodo out of obligation, since he's gonna go to hell if he doesn't. He cares for the child because he wants to honor his fallen brother. And yet, there's still the sense that Frollo doesn't consider the child fully human.
This child is my cross to I may not have saved my brother, but I will save this thing.
Rude. So that's the gist of the bells in Notre Dame in this version. Obviously, the lyrics and the tempo and everything is different, and from a musical and storytelling standpoint, yeah, I prefer the original. It's more intense, more dramatic, more in line with an almost biblical epic about a mad zealot and his quest to purge the world of what he perceives as a sinful group. But in terms of starting Frollo's story here, it really does him a disservice as a character. For years, we've always said that he's an amazing Disney villain because he has way more depth behind his motivation than the typical Disney bad guy. But does he though? I mean, yeah, he does compared to other Disney villains, but does that make him a complex, layered antagonist with motivations behind his actions? Why does he hate gypsies in the movie? I don't know, he's an asshole. There, now watch him crush this lady's neck with a spiky boot. It just makes sense, don't question it. The musical, however, clearly defines what makes this guy hate gypsies. He blames them for the supposed downward spiral of his brother. Also, he doesn't start out murdering gypsies with no remorse. All he does is talk about avoiding their temptation and describing them as an infestation. This is definitely harmful rhetoric, but it's not literal murder, so that's better? In hindsight, I feel like they played their hand too early with movie Frollo. He goes from 0 to 100 in the first 5 minutes, so from there, he can't really progress that much in terms of how evil he can get. Scar didn't try to murder baby Simba in the first 5 minutes of The Lion King, which makes his murder of Mufasa later on a little more shocking. And Hades does try to murder Hercules very early on, but he's funny, so it's okay. Hercules is very tonally distant from Hunchback. It's much less serious, so starting a movie with attempted baby murder is fine.
FBI, open up!
Oh god, no, that's not what I meant. No, wait, please, no! But yeah, Hunchback is pretty serious, and it sets Frollo up right away as someone not to be trifled with. But the musical, while a bit clunkier in the way it delivers its narrative, paints a much more compelling portrait of a misguided person too stuck on his own strict beliefs to realize the value of helping the less fortunate. So that's the opening. The movie is more entertaining and better constructed, but the musical is more compelling and thought-provoking. And for the most part, that's a bit of a theme. Continuing on, Frollo generally has the same disposition towards gypsies in the musical as he does in the movie, though he doesn't seem quite as sadistic and he doesn't express his hatred quite as vividly. He doesn't give a professional whipper advice on the best way to torture people, and he doesn't squish a bunch of bugs for the evils. The first major deviation comes when Quasi is being attacked by the crowd at the Feast of Fools. Frollo still does his whole "a lesson needs to be learned here" shtick and doesn't help Quasi right away, leading to Esmeralda appearing and giving him water. In the movie, Frollo tells her to
Get down at once.
leading to a confrontation where the crowd is very much on Esmeralda's side. But in the musical, Frollo doesn't call her out, the crowd does since they're mad she ruined their fun.
What are you doing? You're ruining all our fun, Dick!
Which actually sounds like how a crowd in real life would react. These people are assholes to the guy they just tortured. They would obviously also be assholes to the oppressed minority woman who stopped their fun. The movie lives in a slapstick fantasy realm, but I digress. Esmeralda vanishes without interacting with Frollo at all. Then the crowd tries to attack Quasi again, only for Frollo to stop them.
We must show kindness to this creature, as our savior did when he healed the lepers.
That's oddly kind of him. It's weird seeing Frollo using religion to justify a positive action considering how much he uses it as a crutch to do bad stuff. But yeah, compared to Mr. Cold and Unfeeling, you get the sense that maybe this Frollo feels bad for the boy. This scene leads into a semi-reprise of Out There, where Frollo seems to express genuine remorse for Quasi. Both Frollos were right in telling Quasi that the world is cruel and wicked and that dumb 15th century townsfolk will revile him as a monster. But musical Frollo is the only one who seemed to tell Quasi this out of genuine concern for his well-being. Though, there is his own reputation to worry about, which makes this lyric particularly brilliant.
How could you do this?
Aww.
To me?
Oh, so yeah, genuine concern for Quasimodo or selfish concern for his reputation? It's really up to interpretation. This is not.
You idiot!
But that's not even the most compelling interaction Frollo has. Let's talk about him and Esmeralda. Does the movie make you uncomfortable? Well, it should. He's super pervy and gross right away, and that becomes even more abundantly clear during Hellfire. But what does the musical do? Well, Esmeralda comes looking for Quasi, and she and Frollo have an argument. It's pretty civil, all things considered. Eventually, Esmeralda asks him an armor-piercing question.
There must be some charity inside you. If you've helped that boy, then surely you can extend that kindness to others, almost as unfortunate. How you would wish others to treat you. Could Do not treat them.
Ooh, that's the golden rule. I learned that from VeggieTales, boyos and girlos. So yeah, this hits Frollo a little hard. He still won't renounce his hatred of gypsies, but he tells Esmeralda to stay for midday mass and maybe find Jesus, I don't know.
My child, though your people are lost, there may be something in you that can be saved. Stay. Perhaps you'll see what true beauty is, and we can continue this conversation afterwards.
So, this is really interesting. If you're unfamiliar with how the story goes, whether it be the Disney narrative or the original novel, here we're 40 minutes in and I don't know if I could effectively call Frollo the villain here. He seems misguided and blinded by his hatred for gypsies, a hatred that was founded by a tangible event in his past, even though his reaction to it was misguided. And not only is he generally kind to Quasimodo and Esmeralda, but you get the sense here that maybe he isn't beyond saving. Maybe the narrative will be about reforming him and he can let go of his bigotry and hatred with Esmeralda's help. Where was the other Frollo at this point in the story? Oh yeah, sniffing hair. Yeah, no, this guy is going to hell.
And if you do drugs, you go to hell before you die.
But anything could happen with the complex character we see in the musical. Let's see what he does next. I really hope it's not something horrible. So after Esmeralda meets Quasimodo, he doesn't help her escape since, well, she's not a prisoner in this version. Frollo comes upstairs and the two of them talk some more. And he offers to instruct her in how to be righteous. And he asks her to live in the bell tower.
You could come here every day. Or better yet, perhaps, you could stay here.
Stay.
In the cathedral. With me.
I think that would be a good idea.
No?
Yeah, never mind, this is uncomfortable. And yeah, this is an abridged version of how it happens in the real world. People with authority try to build a sense of trust with someone they desire, and it turns out to have been manipulation the whole time. It's genuinely beyond disturbing, and while the movie does deserve credit for not being afraid to depict a creepy, lustful man as its villain, it doesn't really come as a shock. He's a monster from the start. Here, Frollo breaks Esmeralda's trust and the audience's trust, neither of which he had in the original. And this is where the limitations of a pure evil villain really start to show themselves. Movie Frollo is a rotten evil perv to the bone, which leaves very little in terms of compelling characterization. Musical Frollo is trying to lie to himself and everyone around him about his true intentions with Esmeralda. One of my favorite lines from the movie is when Frollo, referring to Esmeralda, says,
She'll be out of our lives soon enough.
This use of our harkens back to the main contrast between Quasi and Frollo's reactions to Esmeralda. Heaven's light versus hellfire. She affected them both in different ways. The same mindset is present in this scene from the musical.
She was sent here. She was put in our paths for a reason. To tempt us. And we resisted.
Yeah, you resisted her. Whatever you say, dickweed. But yeah, the extent to which Frollo is trying to deceive himself that Esmeralda is just some sort of pious test really shows just how dehumanizing he is towards her and her people. It also conveys a sense of twisted kinship between him and Quasimodo, his polar opposite in the story. This scene is where he's at his scariest so far, because we've never seen him be this scary before, but we've seen the progression he took to get to this point. Moving on, Frollo merely has Esmeralda thrown out of Notre Dame in this version, not imprisoned there. He tries to move on, but he ends up searching the streets for her night after night, until he finds her at a conga rave, which is a little weird, but it's okay because this song freaking slaps.
Come on, the takers, let's have another one. Let's sing it down and shout out a song.
And he witnesses her and Phoebus making out, which drives him a little crazy. And this leads to hellfire. Obviously, the song is the exact same in the musical, because you can't fix what's already perfect. I wish the staging and the costuming was better in the version I watched. Like, seriously, where's the red hooded figures of death? But again, that comes down to who's performing the song. What's different about the song, however, is the context. It's an amazing aspect of both narratives, but here's the difference. In the movie, this song is the most dimension Frollo gets. It makes his previous actions all the more sinister and begs the question question of whether or not he's going insane due to his lust and obsession. But it's not like this idea was expressed super well or in depth earlier on in the movie. It just kinda happens here, and boom, instant compelling villain. In the musical, however, it's a perfect natural progression of everything we've been seeing on stage for the past hour. It's clear from his actions and his dialogue and his backstory that he has the capability of being a genuine human being, but the twisted way his urges have manifested have slowly turned him into an uncaring, uncomfortable, vile creature. You get the sense that he didn't have to become the emotionally abusive monster he ended up being, and that his choices in life warped him into this thing. And I'm sorry to say, but this is quite simply too complex of an idea for Walt Disney Animation to tackle. Not that a character that progresses into a villain is too complex for kids to understand, but Disney would never try to tackle that sort of thing. Villains either have to be evil from start to finish, an asshole at the start who becomes full-on evil by the end, or a twist villain who is evil the whole time but only pretended to be good.
That was his mistake.
Musical Frollo is none of these. The closest would be Category 2, but I wouldn't call him an asshole in the same vein as Gaston or Clayton. He has unexpectedly kind attributes to him that shine through in spite of his personal biases, but these get snuffed out as the story progresses, by his madness, by his lust, by his obsession with being pious and wiping out anyone who doesn't fit that description. Movie Frollo is a lot less complex than we give him credit for. It's great to watch an entertaining, unabashedly evil villain, but this story in particular begs for its characters to be complex, and Musical Frollo is just that. Also, he T-poses at the end of Hellfire. Boom, that's 2 T-poses. How many T-poses does Movie Frollo have? 0? I thought so. Things progress pretty much as expected from here on out. There are a few differences, like instead of hitting Phoebus with an arrow, Frollo stabs him in the back and then blames Esmeralda for it. What a guy! But the next major deviation comes after Esmeralda is captured. There's an added scene where Frollo comes in and begs her to build a sanctuary with him, claiming that he can still save her soul if she gives herself over. He expressed this sentiment right before lighting her on fire in the movie. But again, here it's a natural progression of the previous scenes between them. This lunatic has convinced himself that his vile treatment of her is justified and morally right. Everything culminates in this interaction, which is one of the best scenes in the entire show. Like, dude, just watch this musical. I don't want to give anything away. It's just a stunning piece of theater, and this scene gave me chills like 3 or 4 times. It perfectly conveys the idea that Frollo genuinely traumatized her and destroyed her life. There's a simple question Esmeralda asks herself in this scene that utterly devastated me with how accurately it illustrated the horror of her situation. I think we can stop there. You can see how it ends for yourself. It's on YouTube. The Hunchback of Notre Dame musical is the masterful adaptation that the movie was desperately trying to be, but wasn't allowed to. The musical is free of the awful tone issues that plagued the original. The added songs are actually fantastic and fit so well that it's hard to tell the difference between what came from the original and what was added. The characters are more compelling, and you buy their plight and their interactions way more. But Frollo stands in a class all his own. I thought the movie Frollo was the greatest Disney villain of all time, and while he's still great, he's also a huge missed potential. Disney could have crafted the most thought-provoking, complex, and disturbingly dark antagonist in any of their movies. And they kinda did, I'll admit, but he could have been so much more. And that's what this musical gets so right. By making him a real human being, they made him scarier. I know it doesn't seem like an amazing feat to make an animated kids movie darker when you adapt it into a live-action musical, but the thing is, that's not what Disney does. Forget the live-action movies, those are obvious terrible cash grabs. Look at the Disney musicals. None of them are terrible, but they are cash grabs. Bringing Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King to the big screen didn't improve these stories. It's the same story, but with some more pointless songs thrown in. That doesn't apply to every song. I mean, She's in Love is a genuine jam, and The Beast has a couple of solid ballads here and there. But these musicals don't exist because the movies demanded to be on stage and be more mature. They exist because the movies were popular. Put them on Broadway, add a few songs, bada boom, money. The Hunchback of Notre Dame movie was made because the creators had a story they wanted to tell, and the musical was made because the creators had a story they wanted to improve, and that's what they did. This is such an excellent piece of theater, so I'm so glad that it never made it to Broadway and was shunned by Disney in favor of Frozen. That's a movie that needed a musical. Frozen! Yeah, remember when I said the Disney musical adaptations weren't terrible? Well, I forgot about this one, with its pitiful 3 Tony nominations.
I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by
In the world we now
The SpongeBob musical and Mean Girls got 12 nominations apiece that same year, FYI. Hunchback probably would have swept the Tonys. But no, I'm so happy we got Frozen on Broadway instead. Isn't that great?
Oh, goody.
But at least this musical, despite not being on Broadway, is really starting to gain traction among theater fans. I've talked to a lot of people who say this is one of their favorite musicals, a sentiment I've never heard expressed about Frozen, so there's that. And I think a lot of this musical success not only comes from the expansion of the elements that made the movie a cult classic, but the revision of certain aspects that were done to make this a more compelling work of art. It's not perfect. I'm not a big fan of the chorus narrating everything, and also, actually, yeah, that's my only big issue. But I think at the center of these compelling changes is Claude Frollo. Because in stark contrast to what the movie has been telling me my entire life, despite all of his awful tendencies, Claude Frollo is truly human. And that makes him an even greater monster than before. So yeah, turns out the movie Frollo isn't quite as compelling as we all thought. Maybe we can't call him the greatest Disney villain of all time because of this flaw. I guess we'll have to give that distinction to a villain who has no flaws. Tamatoa, baby!
That was his mistake.